Emocjonujących wrażeń życzy Energa z Grupy Orlen. Sponsor strategiczny festiwalu EnergaCAMERIMAGE.
Electronic medical services available to the residents of the Kujawsko-Pomorskie Voivodeship. Results from ultrasound and X-ray machines are immediately transferred onto the doctor's computer and are available online. What does it mean for you? Faster diagnostics, no waiting in queues, easy communication with doctors from different units, and access to test results at any time. We provide electronic medical documentation for you.
Odpręż się i daj się porwać emocjom.
Prawdziwe przeżycie. Coś dla każdego.
Spędź jesień z kanałami Filmbox.
Poruszające biografie, Uciekam przed nienawiścią.
Historyczne zwycięstwa. Filmy pełne wzruszeń i emocji.
Raz się żyje.
W listopadzie w Kino Polska.
Włącz RMF Classic i zmień swój świat. RMF Classic. Najpiękniejsza muzyka filmowa.
Fakty RMF. Najbardziej wiarygodne źródło informacji. RMF FM. Radio numer 1 w Polsce.
Szybka, intuicyjna, przejrzysta, nowa RP.pl. Polecam redaktor naczelny Cezary Szymanek.
Nadszedł czas, by usiąść w kinowym fotelu. Poczuć dreszcz filmowych emocji. Otoczyć się ekranami ScreenX. Poczuć każdy ruch i zakręt z 4DX. I powtórzyć to kolejny raz i kolejny. Ile tylko chcesz. Najwyższy czas poczuć magię kina. W najlepszym wydaniu. Przeżywaj więcej w Cinema City.
Partnerem motoryzacyjnym festiwalu CAMERIMAGE jest Autofrelik, autoryzowany dealer Mercedes-Benz.
Chcesz się z nami spotkać na EnergaCAMERIMAGE? Zaszczep się.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Inbal Weinberg. Kalina, Ivanov, and I are the co-founders of the Production Designers Collective. It's an organization of production designers. We have about 750 members from all over the world, and we work on promoting our craft and sharing experiences with colleagues around the world. And we're very, very excited to be collaborating with the CAMERIMAGE Film Festival this year and talking about the very important collaboration between cinematographers and production designers. So just to let you know how the panel is going to go, we're here for 2 hours. We're going to speak, just have flowing conversation between us for about 45 minutes. Then every one of these lovely panelists is going to show us a little presentation of the film that they're specifically here at the festival with. And then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. So I'm going to start by letting the panelists introduce themselves briefly and tell us a bit about themselves and how they got to where they are. Kalina?
Hello, I am originally from Bulgaria. And at least everybody that's Polish here can relate to that. And I left with my family in 1979. Arrived in New York and got into theater school, so I'm actually trained as a theater designer, and fell in love with film while I was working in the industry as a set designer, as a draftsperson, and found my path into film through storyboarding. So and I was very lucky to storyboard one of maybe my fourth film that I storyboarded was Silence of the Lambs. So it was quite a start. It was, as I always said, like it was a downhill from there, but anyway. But eventually I transitioned to production design. And my film here in the festival is The Tender Bar. George Clooney directed it, and Martin Roux is the cinematographer, so I'll speak about our collaboration. And with Inbal, we co-founded the Production Designers Collective, and that's about it.
Hi, my name is Nelson Coates. I am a production designer. Started my career as an actor. Started acting professionally when I was 6, and made my way to doing shows off Broadway and national tours and singing and dancing and all that. And so I started designing for the theater, and someone saw my theatrical designs and asked me to design a pilot for a television series. And that show got picked up, and I designed that, and then moved into television movies, and then eventually features. And so I've been designing television features for almost 30 years. Hard to believe when you put that number to it. I love what I do. Every day I pinch myself that I get to do narrative design, telling stories, finding new ways to add depth to scripts, through the details and the levels of that. I'm here with the movie In the Heights, which is screening tonight and also Thursday. It's one of my favorite musicals of all time, and being a song and dance kind of guy myself, it was a dream project with John Chu, whom I also worked with on Crazy Rich Asians, and Alice Brooks as the cinematographer on that, and they'll be in later tonight for that screening. So I'm very excited to talk with each of you today.
Thank you. My name's Ari Wegner. I'm a cinematographer. I grew up in Melbourne, Australia. I went to film school there. Had a very brief career as a very mediocre second AC because I was mainly just spying on the DPs and what they were up to. That's where I was trying to get to. And yeah, I kind of started lots of shorts with the people you go to film school with as I was being a second AC, and then moved on to longer and longer things. And the film I'm here with is The Power of the Dog, which is directed by Jane Campion. Yeah, screening tonight. That's pretty much it.
Great. I thought that maybe we'll start sort of chronologically at the beginning of every project and these specific projects. And some people don't know, but production designers often start very, very early, even before the official production is in place. And so I wanted to ask each one of you, what was the sort of beginning of your project, and what was the first time that you interacted with a DP or a production designer?
So the Tender Bar, we did it during COVID, and from the very beginning of the project, we determined that we're going to build our interiors on stage to protect the actors, and quite frankly, was the best solution actually for the film. I work extremely collaboratively with all the artists, not just the cinematographer, but also the costume designer. So the very first thing I do is I make a presentation of the key images of the movie from a design point of view, but also from storytelling point of view. And very often that book is actually my way into interviewing even with the director, that I make it even before I get the project. I already have a book of images that becomes kind of the Bible, the visual Bible of the film. So once I have that, I immediately send it to Martin and to Jenny, the costume designer, and so that we can collaborate together and have the discussion from the very beginning, because yes, I'm hired first and I'm on the clock first, but I don't want to work in a void. I don't want to be alone in this journey, in this artistic journey. It's super important to me that we are all visually connected and collaborate. So that's how I started the project very early on. I share all these thoughts. And then we go back and forth. It's all remote work, you know, through, because of COVID. And Martin was in Germany, and Jenny was in Vancouver, and I was in Boston. We made the movie in Boston. And, but I've learned to really embrace the internet and presentations and remote work. And that's how we started.
I came to In the Heights in a little bit different sort of way. When I was interviewing for Crazy Rich Asians with the director John Chu, I already knew he was attached to In the Heights. I had seen In the Heights in its first month on Broadway, and being a song and dance guy and loving musicals, I was just gobsmacked with the show. And was in 2008 when I saw it. I was doing another movie in New York at the time. And my crew said, you have to see this new show that just opened on Broadway. And I went, and we were filming 10 days in New York on the movie I was working on at that moment. And I saw In the Heights 3 nights of that 10 days, and just was so in love with this. I vowed that somehow I had to be the designer for that movie when it came about. Ironically, a different director and a different team came on board and started developing it over time, and then it went through several iterations, and then John Chu was attached to direct. And so when I was meeting with him on Crazy Rich Asians, I knew if I did a good job on that movie that I would have a shot at doing In the Heights. And second week of filming in Malaysia on Crazy Rich Asians, John looked at me and said, oh, so what are you doing after this? And I said, don't have any plans at the moment. And he said, would you be interested in doing a musical called In the Heights? And I was like, well, that sounds okay, you know. I didn't tell him till much later that I was actually, you know, like dying to do this show. A very interesting tidbit is he has a longtime collaborator, cinematographer Alice Brooks, and she had just had a child and wasn't attached to Crazy Rich Asians, but we thought In the Heights was going to go a little sooner, and then it needed some more development as Miramax was going through its collapse. And Lin-Manuel Miranda and Kira Huedes got the rights back to the show. And so in the meantime, John got a Apple TV Plus show called Home Before Dark. And that series, I got to meet Alice, and we became fast friends. I call our relationship brother and sister. We talk almost every other day, even now. So having that opportunity to work together as a team really developed and solidified a working relationship and how to go through the dialogue. And so literally, we were already kind of solid in place when we went right from that into prep on In the Heights. So that's how I came to this show.
It's so nice to hear you guys like still buddies, because I find that as well. It's such a like journey you go on together. Yeah. I guess it can go either one of two ways. Like I never want to see you again, or I'm gonna miss you. When Jane called me about this film she was planning, one of the things she said that she really was looking for in a DP was someone that would be available for the whole year before we shot. I don't know if she'd felt rushed in the past, but she felt like the scale of this, and it was her first film in 12 years. She'd been doing TV between Bright Star and The Power of the Dog, so I think the idea of making just what she called like 2 perfect hours and making it really planned was important. And also the place where we knew we were going to shoot in the South Island of New Zealand, where Jane, I call it Jane's backyard, but it's like her kind of place she knows really well. So she very wisely knew that that part of the world, it changes visually a lot over the year. The grass goes from kind of fluorescent green to silver between winter and the end of summer. So we knew scouting about the time of year we were going to shoot would you know, it'd be really hard to make a decision on a place if it looked completely different to when we were going to shoot. So, yeah, I first met Grant Major, who was our designer, probably in a scout van, and yeah, we did a little first trip about a year before we shot and drove around for about a week, kind of looking at trying to find a property to shoot, to build a ranch, 1920s ranch, find a valley where we could look 360, and we were looking for a particular kind of mountain range. And you're really spoilt for choice in the South Island of New Zealand for mountain ranges, but I guess we're getting into a conversation about what kind of a mountain range, and I'll show you guys some photos later about, I mean, you can get full Lord of the Rings mountain range, or which actually incidentally Grant designed, so he also knew all those places to go. Like, oh, turn down this road, there's a really good one. So he, yeah, we were kind of, I guess, big conceptual stuff, like what kind of a mountain range are we talking about? Needed to feel like big, mythical, but also humble enough that a family could own it on a cattle ranch. And then the next big thing was, I guess, the house, which we knew we were always going to build the exterior on location, which is quite a remote location, so it didn't make sense to do the interiors there as well. We were going to do the interiors on a stage back in Auckland and build the house on location. And then actually a big kind of conversation was the visual effects. There's no kind of showy visual effects in the film, but we wanted the visual effects to be really invisible. And sorry, I'd learned on a film I'd done earlier, True History of the Kelly Gang, working with Karen Murphy, who has worked a lot with Baz Luhrmann, and she really opened my eyes to how much the production designer is involved with the VFX in terms of actually designing what is going to go there and being the guide of that and kind of the custodian of that look, and very much, pretty much like designing it as if you would design any set and being the protector of that rather than letting it get, yeah, I guess handballing it to someone else that may not necessarily share your vision. Yeah, and so yeah, with Grant, I guess designing, we weren't sure yet what would be visual effects and what we could afford to build and what would be visual effects, but we wanted to first design how we wanted it to look and then later design what would be what. So that was yeah, neither Jane and I had done much visual effects to this scale, I guess, that Grant was a great guide. And also our visual effects supervisor, Jay Hawkins, was on a lot of those early scouts as well. Testament to Jane, I think, as well, to get everyone in as soon as possible. Yeah.
Great. I was going to ask about specific areas of collaboration, but now that you brought up visual effects, I think that's a great follow-up question, especially because it's a big conversation in the production design world. And so I guess a question to Nelson and Kalina about visual effects. How did you collaborate with the visual effects department, supervisor, and the DP, of course, in that conversation?
The Tender Bar didn't have many visual effects. Even though it's a period movie, 1970s and 1980s, we just didn't have, I literally was, because it's so realistic and naturalistic, I wanted everything to be in camera. It didn't feel like the movie should have visual effects, except when we wanted to erase solar panels. I can't do anything about that. So, but we had the kind of maintenance visual effects on that movie, in a sense. There were only a couple of visual effects in it, where I wanted like a factory in the background to be aged. So what I do normally to translate that idea, I do a lot of elaborate concept sketches, and I share them with the director and the DP. We agree on the look, and then we send them to the visual effects department. And then what I do, but I did have a very big visual effects project before the Tender Bar. It's an HBO show called Lovecraft Country, and I have no idea if it's gotten to Poland or not, but that was really very heavily visual effects involved. And so the visual effects supervisor was with us all the time on that show. And that's a very different dynamic. in a sense, because they're right there and you can meet directly with them. And we really, at the end of the day, the production designer creates the world. When we speak about creating worlds, that's what we talk about. We create the concepts, we create the ground plans, we create the physical world, everything. So when we do our concept sketches and our designs, they actually, the visual effect is in them already. And so then we then go to the visual effects supervisor with all this Bible of images and design, and then we ask the question, now, how much of this do we need to build? And so we all agree on, all right, for this particular shot, we need 18 feet and a cutting line. We're always trying to figure out, sometimes you can get away with 10 feet, right? It's all very individual, but that's the collaboration, and that's basically how I work with them. I'm a little bit of a control freak about the look, so it's really hard for me to hand it over to somebody. So I try to make all of these like really elaborate books to hand them to them at the end with all the elements. And I did that even for Tenderbar, even though it had a few visual effects shots. I would say I'm very protective of the look and of the world.
Do you find it helps, or when you're presenting those things, that there's already a sense of how the scene might be shot, like what the shots will be, or how the director and DP are planning to kind of, like how much of that might be seen, or whether it will be sharp or soft, or do you kind of get in, at what stage does that factor in for you?
Wonderful question. I work very heavily with the cinematographer. So after I come up with all the concepts and stuff, then I go to the director and the cinematographer before I hand them over, oh, this is what we should do. I think this is exactly the question. How do we want to shoot this? For me, I naturally think like a camera because I started as a storyboard artist, so my brain is always making shots or designing for shots. Yeah. I never design a set because it looks cool. It will look cool if we're together. Yeah. I have no doubt about that. But it's more important that it serves the story and it serves the shooting and how we agree to shoot it. And Lovecraft Country was this crazy show that went through periods, through multiple planets, multiple periods. It was all about black people in 1955 in America. Jim Crow had a political edge to it. It had a magical edge to it. It was very complex. So the work I did with Rob McLachlan, and I'm sorry he's not here today, we really talked about the style and how we wanted to shoot that. In Tenderbar, because it's so realistic and naturalistic and humanistic, you don't want to have the shots to call attention to them. It was a different kind of vibe and approach to the entire work. But absolutely the first conversation is with the director and the DP together, yes.
When we were doing In the Heights, obviously we were shooting in Vancouver, doing Home Before Dark, and our very first scout, Alice was shooting that episode and couldn't go with us on the scout, so before we left, she said, please, if possible, if the bodega location can be on a southwest corner. When you see the movie, there's a bodega, which is a local store in the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, and a lot of action takes place on an intersection. So we, in that scout, had to come up with what was going to be our main intersection. We spent 3 days racing through because I had to get back, of course, designing that show back in Vancouver. And I found an intersection that had a southwest corner that had a bodega, though you'll see in a little bit what we did for that. We knew we wanted that show to feel like it was based in a particular neighborhood, and yet we knew that we wouldn't have enough of those elements there. So we knew we were going to have to create the neighborhood on stage as well, but when you see the movie, you think that it's happening all in that environment. The intersection had a lot of great things to that intersection, but needed a lot of work. So basically it got facades put on for 4 city blocks to each direction from the intersection that we used. So during that whole scout, I was sending photos back and forth to Alice and saying, oh my gosh, how about this? And we could do this and all this. And there's a salon that also has a lot of play in the show, and there were 6 salons in the neighborhood, but none where we wanted them, and so I had to cover up with facades the existing salons and then create the one that we did. So we had about 10 feet of interior for that, and then we recreated the intersection on stage. And so the complexity of that in itself was going to be, we knew it was going to be very challenging from a lighting standpoint, as well as the opening of the show is an 8-minute long song, and people are coming in and out of doorways. The continuity is crazy, and we're going from location to stage and location to stage. And yet, then as the story progresses, John had a list. When you do a musical's even more complex than a regular movie because you're kind of creating it and designing it for the performances and the dance spaces, and yet no matter what you've designed, you have to make it work for the choreography and for how you're going to shoot the choreography. And so literally, as fast as we were getting spaces, we were then trying to watch the choreographic rehearsals and then modify the environments, and Alice and I would be in the dance rehearsals and be changing and really just doing a whole mind bend of how this song is going to go. John had a list, almost like a map of what he wanted to happen in each song. And so we had those notes as a launch point for the style of each. Some musicals, when you put them together, they have a connective through line, and every song is like a different variation on a theme. But instead, John wanted this one to actually have different characters and different styles for each of the songs. So a couple of those songs involved visual effects as well, and I'll get to that a little bit more in the visual presentation in just a little bit, but since there are dreams that people are dreaming over this 4-day period, you see elements of that work its way in. So Mark Russell, our visual effects supervisor, and I and Alice would go through exactly what we thought those shots would be, and then we would pitch those to the director and say, okay, if we did this, we could do this. And it just kind of developed at the same time as then the choreography. It was really an amazingly seamless connection as you're seeing things, and having a safe space to work in, feeling comfortable to throw out ideas, knowing that it's not going to get batted down, that the team, most of the team had already worked together already. So we all had a great working relationship and language that it made it easy to say, oh, here's how we're going to go forward. And yet, if you haven't seen the movie, there is a amazing moment, visual effects-wise, that when you're watching it, you can't quite figure out how it was accomplished because it's physical and cinematography and visual effects so tightly wound into the choreography that it gets you, it just reaches inside and gets your heart. And we knew we had to sell that correctly with what we built. So I looked all through Washington Heights, literally walked every street, cataloged everything, was doing a huge deep dive into what made Washington Heights different than the Bronx or different than Inwood. All the little tile or light fixtures and things. And basically found styles of buildings that I wanted to cobble together to create this, what we call the dancing wall, and you'll see this in a little bit. And the neighborhood had some challenges, such as now New York has painted bike lanes bright green. And it's like, how do we take those things out? How do we get, we have a MacGuffin or an idea that the story is being told, and it's probably 10 years back or 7 years back, because by the end of the movie you see that there's a little girl who's now 7-ish. And so we needed to have a shift in the looks and be able to make it work. So in our visual effects discussions with the cinematographer, we were like, okay, we're going to get rid of these elements because they're going to come back by the time we get to the end of the movie. and then how do we make the insides and outsides work, and then how do all of those work together to create sequences that you kind of can't figure out how we pulled off. We never wanted to show the artifice until you finally get to this moment. So mapping that out was part of the wonderful journey.
How did you decide, like you're saying you had to rebuild it all on the stage, like what were the factors that went into that decision?
Mainly the fact that the interiors that were on the intersection we liked were non-existent, non-shootable.
Right.
Either the salon didn't exist at all. It's in front of a townhouse, so we built that in front. So I had about 10 feet of working space for that.
Right.
The bodega and the car service, you could barely walk inside the spaces, and they needed to be very shootable spaces. So what we ultimately built as the interior of the bodega, on stage, you see the salon across, you see the street, you see cars, you see the full intersection, enough so that there's the connection, and yet outside you get the full height of all the buildings. The bodega itself, all the aisles, all the counters, everything is on wheels.
Yeah,
there's
cool.
Pieces that pull off. There's beautiful light fixtures that, because we designed, it's a store, so there is going to be built-in lighting. One of the things that's different, it seems these days even more so than in the past, is that production designers are lighting elements of the set in the design even before maybe a cinematographer is hired. And so you have to be very thoughtful about color temperature and flexibility. We had all the refrigerator cases and all the above lighting and things that actually you have to hide and provide places to hide lighting. And also think about the sound department, because you have all these refrigerators, they can't be making sound. And so every element of these spaces then was worked through. Just like in the salon, Alice was like, well, all these New York spaces are long tubes into the building and there's no light in the back. And I said, but there's some open alleys. So she's like, is there any way we can get some sort of industrial window in the back? And so I designed a huge slanted window in the back of the salon so that there would be a motivation for light also in the back of the space.
And whenever there's a thing like that, like in our film, there's the interior and the exterior, there's always a conversation about how do we sell the, how do we sell it, I guess, so it doesn't give itself away. And did you guys have, when you were planning that, have particular, I don't know, for me, one way to do it is to have particular shots that kind of you invest in and plan are going to somehow bridge the gap or not cut. Did you, when you were planning it, were there shots that Alice had in mind that you wanted to do to sell it, or was all cuts or some other technique?
Oftentimes when you're designing a space, it has one or two functions. In this case, we were in these spaces so much that they had to work for whatever John would dream up at the moment, or whatever the choreography would lead. So we knew we had to have the relationship between the buildings. And fortunately, since we were adding facades to the location, we actually took those facades back to the stage and put them onto the interiors that we're building, so they could totally relate. And they're the exact same doors, and they're the exact same windows. And so you do see the connection, and it allowed us to kind of double beat as we were filming. You had gotten part of that in and out at location. You could redo that in and out. So to editorially, Myron Kirsten, the amazing editor on this as well, was able to choose, at what point to make the cut. Whether it's on feet coming through, John had very strong ideas how to introduce certain characters with their shoes or with coming across. So we knew we had to get the real pavement and then all of a sudden pull up to them and be on stage.
Ari, I was wondering, since we're talking a little bit about building on stage, I know that, as you all mentioned, lighting has now become a really collaborative effort with the technology changing. And so I was wondering if you can all talk, maybe Ari, you could start with, if you did build on the stage, what was your conversation about lighting in terms of, or in general, not necessarily about that project, and what helps you in your discussion with production designers?
Yeah, so our film takes place in 1926, where electric lighting is very much only just starting to be introduced in domestic spaces, and they're quite a wealthy family in the book. It makes a whole point about them being the first house in the whole area to have electric lighting. So, but they're also really tight, so they don't turn the lights on very much. Especially one of them, Phil, played by Benedict Cumberbatch's character, is not so into this transition to the future. So we had this idea that he would not, he's not so into, the electric lights are not always used. But actually for us, there was a few big challenges there. Well, I think one, I guess it relates to lighting because it's windows and window dressings and stuff. So it's, we were really nervous about what we were just talking about, to making the connection, and how would we make sure that it wasn't, I don't know, that you believed it. And the exterior is very, it's a huge, vast space, and this house, because they're a very wealthy family, kind of incredibly high ceilings and big windows, and so that was both exciting because it was a way to get a link, but also kind of terrifying because you actually have to pull it off. And, you know, it's, of course, there's a point where one of the producers or someone doing a budget says, well, could we just put curtains, or what about shears? You could just like blow them out maybe. And I was kind of like, well, we could, but I'm not going to. But we had to find a way basically for not every single interior shot to become a visual effects shot, because that was also just kind of an unkind burden to put on that budget. We couldn't afford to do it properly, basically. If we put blue screen out there and replaced it later, it just wasn't in the budget to do that. So we decided to print backdrops. We didn't have, again, enough money actually to print, to get like a, you know, Translight or something as fancy as you read in all those cool magazines that everyone does. So we just printed kind of like a billboard. We got Jay, the visual effects supervisor, helped us take these kind of panoramas down on location, and was very kind enough to do kind of all the calculations as to what the best lens would be and the scale. I would have loved to be involved with that, but by that point we were shooting and my brain was like just trying to get through till lunch kind of thing. So he really kindly took on that role, which I guess is not technically a visual effects thing, but he was someone that could do it, and it was kind of, in a way, avoiding visual effects. Or he knew, I guess, he was going to have to then do some work on it because the film takes place over a whole year and we were just there for one summer, so we decided to print a kind of, we could only afford as well to do one time of day or one season. You know, in an ideal world you'd have night winter and high sun day and dusk and autumn dusk, and, you know, but we could basically only choose one time of day and one season, so we chose a kind of bright overcast summer day to print on the backdrops, and yeah, they were incredibly effective. That was Grant's suggestion. He'd done it before, and I'll admit I was slightly skeptical. Just it felt too good to be true, how you could just print something, and I was like, surely it needs to be like 500K resolution, it's going to be there, and it was like really good. And we lit it for different times of day. I lit it with sky panels for dusk or night, and it allowed also that all the sheen and all the reflections in the set were correct as well, because they weren't getting any blue or green pollution. And then it also allowed us to not have to have shears or curtains. It's an incredibly like masculine space. There's almost no kind of, it's like being sucked of any maternal or feminine care, and so the idea of having, you know, frilly curtains or any kind of decorative thing. There's one room that's the exception, but for the most part, in the main part of the house is austere, I guess. So the idea of having, I don't know, it didn't make any sense to have curtains. Shears also felt weird, and they're my worst nightmare in general. We can get onto that later. Yeah, so lighting started with windows, I guess, and then we did end up having these like a roller blind that was like had a semi-transparent kind of oilcloth type thing. Then the fixtures, yeah, we made sure they were all kind of dimmable, and had big conversations about what particular like globes should go in them. And then we had some other spaces like barns and so forth, which did have some night scenes in them, and whether that would be kind of kerosene type of lamp or whether they would have electric lights in there based on what kind of mood we wanted to create. We ended up going with a kerosene kind of lamp concept because the scene that happens in there has a kind of nostalgic, romantic. It's more of a romantic kind of nostalgic space. That's kind of the start of it, I guess. But yeah, a lot of that's working with the props buyers and getting very specific, really. And yeah, I think that's. But I guess, sorry, I was going to say actually we had a big conversations as well about the kind of lamp shades, because I think they're kind of always a big. They create color on, and yeah, because they're illuminated, you kind of drawn to them visually. So yeah, big conversations about light lampshades. Yeah.
So I have a very different approach to backings. Part of it is because I come from theater. That's my training. So I actually like to build a replica of what the street across is. So in the bar, when you see the movie, I like to do physical representation, not a printed one, a physical representation, because it allows you to light each window individually and allows you to do night and day individually. And we calculate, they're what I call the miniatures, basically, because they're reduced. They're not exactly the same as the building. They're reduced according to the lens. We do lens studies in my department, and depending on the width of the street. So in the bar, we created both what was across from the door and what was to the left of it, because that's where the windows were. The very first conversation I had with Martin was about the windows in the bar and the windows in the house. And I pitched this idea that the bar becomes the home, and he's kind of like the mothership of all these characters, and it's like a womb. So I wanted the windows to be very dirty and different tints of color, different paints. And part of that is because I determined that the bar should go back all the way to 1928, which helps you then build a history. Even though the movie starts in 1972, you are now back 5 decades of windows and grime and dirt, and nothing in New York or Long Island is clean. There is no such thing. So we're very big on aging, those of us who come from New York, because everything's dirty. But it really helps cinematography, it really helps production design. So he loved the idea of the different tinted panels, and we knew that that would really help us sell this idea of the street, and so it would connect naturally to when we went. We actually made the movie in Massachusetts, but when we went on the exteriors, it was a real bar, but we transformed even the exterior anyway, and I'll talk about that in the presentation. But I'm a really big fan of 3D miniatures for when you do a set. I prefer that. I certainly also use translights, have used them, certainly have used that kind of cheap printing. It's really the budget that determines how we go about it. But even on a low budget film, I still fight for the 3D stuff. I did it, one of my very early movies is a movie called Smoke, and I convinced the producers to do it back then. And they were a little bit like mad at me, and I said, you're gonna love everything about it because it's gonna save you so much money in other ways. And they did, it really worked. And so, and in terms of practicals, that is one of the most important conversations you can have with the DP, and you start there. The first thing I ask them is, what kind of light do you like? Do you prefer in your practicals? Some people really like glass globes, some people don't. I go with what the DP, I follow the DP's natural instincts and how they see it. I don't feel that I need to challenge that ever, because I think that's part of the beauty of the collaboration. We're here together on this journey, and I want to know what the DP wants to use, what is their favorite thing. I always ask, are there any colors you do not like? By the way, I ask directors that, because believe it or not, I have discovered some directors who suddenly say to you, I hate red or I hate orange. I had a director who hated orange. I had to throw out all my orange sweaters, which apparently I had a lot, so like literally I was never going to show up in orange. I mean, so I actually learned to, honestly, so you learn to ask these questions because there's no point. If somebody hates orange, I'm not going to have anything orange. It's okay. There's plenty of other colors in the palette that we can determine, So you go with it. It's part of these challenges and limitations, and it's part of the collaboration. So this discussion about lampshades or glass globes or this is really important. And with Martin, we wanted a particular kind of feeling in the bar, and we wanted a particular feeling in the house. And it was my first time working with him, so we were learning about each other. And I think we had a really great time because we were so communicative with each other and so open to each other's ideas. And the ground plan is so important when you do a set because it really dictates where the camera can go. So, and that's something, again, you learned from theater, because in theater, you're truly determining actually what we call the mise en scène, where the actors are going to enter and exit from, right? And so, it's so ingrained into my brain to do that. But that's a very, very important conversation. And then, of course, now, a lot of you are very young and you're not going to build sets in your first movies. You're not going to have the money. But the approach to location is the same. I think the collaboration is the same. When you pick locations, you are looking for the layout. You are looking for how will the camera flow. Think, the good designers think like the best help for the cinematographer. They think about the camera angles, and then we bring the photos, and then we discuss. So all those discussions are very important, and I think the approach is similar. Sets, we do sets because it's a much more controlled environment, and it can get you a day that you can do your 10 hours with an expensive actor.
Since we're talking about uses of light, there's a sequence in The Heights called Paciencia y Fe, which means patience and faith. And it's basically the matriarch, the abuela, or the grandmother of the neighborhood, talking about her life journey. And by this time in the movie, we're into a bit of the fantastical dream sequences. And as she's talking about this journey, I wanted to take the audience on a journey as well, and you're in New York. And so one of the things when John and Alice and I scout, we love scouting because you find the movie there. You find ideas that you've never thought of. You find launching out points, things that inspire. And we didn't know where this actual number was going to take place. John at first had an idea that was going to be on a soundstage, kind of a black box environment, and that we would just go through elements as with lighting and tell the story that way. And I like to see story, so I was encouraging him to find that we would go to a New York space of some sort that could serve as that black box idea, but that would have some sort of architecture that could lend itself to the different time periods and things that are being talked about in the song. So we saw several things, and John felt some of them were too literal. And one of the places that I had been in my early scouting before everybody came in to New York was the Transit Museum in Brooklyn that have all the different cars that have been used over time with the subway systems. And so I took John and Alice there, and he was like, oh, can we shoot here? And it was like, well, it was more confining than what we thought it should be. And so we actually then found a closed maintenance facility in Brooklyn, the Utrecht station, and brought in period cars. The idea that I pitched to John was that the abuela would get onto a contemporary car, and often as the subways in New York go from outside to in the tunnels, there's an energy exchange through the electrical system, and it flickers. And so we thought, well, if she gets on at a station and goes through, that there could be that flickering, and then all of a sudden the car could change in some sort of way. So we shot on a station, and then we took those contemporary cars into this maintenance facility that we got closed for 3 days of filming. And we then, Alice lit it for day, we flickered, and then everyone in their car changes, and all of a sudden they're in 1940s monochromatic tone-on-tone clothing from Cuba, and all of what would be the normal ads are now graphic representations of Cuba in 1940 with the palm trees and things, and she comes out onto the platform, and then through light and through elements of scenery and set dressing, we work through the story as she's talking about people going onto the light poles, and the dancers are going up and hitting the light poles, and then she's moving through, and we had 1940s cars that she's pulled into, and they're not now cars, they're just environments, and you see ladies doing laundry and dreaming about New York. And John said, if there's a sign that says, welcome to New York, and then it pops on, and it's like they're all leaning toward that, and then they rush out as if they're going into New York, and then it starts snowing as she's singing about the weather, and everything was with light and with some special effects and with elements of scenery. And there's a moment where they talk about New York being so crowded, and so since we're using dance and theater in this number, I suggested luggage, because we always say, oh, they're living out of a suitcase. Well, people are literally coming out of the suitcases in the dance moment. She's pulled in through, and to do the transition back to contemporary after you've gone through all these various scenarios, you see the dancers rush toward a beam of light. Alice had this great suggestion that if we brought a colored light right down and the abuela grabs it, that it becomes the subway pole in the middle and brings us back. And then as we go through, there's a tunnel at the 191st Street station that's known for all its graffiti. And graffiti is very challenging. We also have to deal with all the legal aspects of anything that you see on screen. So any art, anything that's copyrighted, we have to get clearance or the ability to film that. And we wanted to have the scene end in this beautiful, amazing, colorful environment. And Alice had great ideas about doing bands of light and the dancers coming together. And yet, we couldn't get most of the graffiti cleared. So we actually created our own graffiti and skinned the tunnel so that the pieces that we couldn't see all felt like her last movement as she's going into the light. And so seeing the choreography, John's ideas, Alice's ideas, my ideas, all come together in this moment. It's really exciting to see the light help tell the story.
That sounds amazing.
It's pretty exciting.
You guys, as we're in this fantastical world, I think this is our moment to share some of the presentation, the visuals. So I think probably about 10 minutes per person, if that's okay, because then we'll open it up to questions. Kalina, we can start with you, if that's okay. Okay.
Can I watch it from there?
Yeah. Oh, you want to watch?
Yeah. There we go. Okay. Yeah, this will be a little easier to talk about the images. Okay, so...
Okay, I think we're good to open it up. Great.
I always start everything with my department, and this was a small movie, so this is a small art department, but I want to always pay homage to the crew that I work with. I don't do this alone. And so this is Welcome to the Moranger House. It's based on a book. The Tender Bar is based on a memoir, so it's a true story. We don't have to read all of it, but what I really wanted to do in this film is create the 70s and the 80s, not with no sense of nostalgia, but create what I call an emotional design. I wanted the design to be accurate and to really represent the emotional state of the characters. And so here we go with the Morangers. So these are my sketches. So the way I designed is I start with drawing. I find the locations, and then when I hit the location, we were very lucky to find this one, because we wanted a small house in a neighborhood where every other house was very big and very pristine, and this was the eyesore. This was the one house that was neglected, and no one, and it looked like a band of bandits lived in there. And so we found a house, and one of the things that, so the sketch really shows sort of the life of it and how I want to transform the house. And we brought a lot of weeds, we brought a lot of set dressing, we brought a lot of picture cars. Obviously when you do a period movie, the picture cars tell quite a bit of the story, and they tell quite a bit of the character. And our characters, the whole story is that Grandpa bought this house in the 40s, and he had money, but he was very unhappy making this money. So he left Wall Street when he was like 33, and never worked again a day of his life. And whatever he made until then, he just lived off with his 3 children and wife and let the house go. And the house has 1 bathroom, and it constantly backs up. So this is one of the concept sketches where that I was talking to you guys about when we make elaborate concept sketches. And part of this was to show George, the director, and the DP and everybody, this very particular wallpaper that we created specifically for the show. And this is the set. These are now photos of the set, and you can see the wallpaper. And I try, when I do concepts, to really have, for them to be quite accurate to what the design is. So these lamps that you see and everything, these was very big discussions with Martin about these. He loves globes like that. He loves milk glass, and I was just delighted because it's one of my favorite ways to do a period movie. So here we go. So that's what this was about. And then you can see different, like you can see, there was a lot of many scenes happen in this house. It's very tiny, but what it allowed me to do, the interior was about 10% bigger than the exterior. And that way the camera can flow. And the ground plan was very open, and we'll show it to you at the end. But it was the choreography of all this messiness of 12 people around living in this house all the time with 1 bathroom was super important to us. These are, Ben Affleck plays the uncle, which is a pivotal part of the movie. And Lily Rabe is the mother. That's the living room. And Christopher Lloyd is the grandfather. And he always sits in this chair. And again, the way we told time from the 70s to the 80s was actually only through the TV. The couch is called in the book the bicentennial couch, was a really interesting piece of, there were a page of description in the book about the couch, so I took it very seriously. So we created our own fabric and everything. So here's the ground plan. Now here's an interesting story about this exterior. Normally when you find an exterior like that, you go inside, you photograph the interior, and then you recreate it. The woman would not let us inside the house. All we can survey was the exterior dimensions and the porch, but not the interior. In a way that was quite wonderful for me, because then I could just do whatever I wanted and whatever was correct for camera and for our scenes. So you can see what I mean, is that my goal here was to connect everything, all the spaces, so the camera can really dance through them at any time. And the beauty of working with a director like George, who is so actor-oriented and himself is an actor, is that when he comes in the morning, I always open set every morning, when he comes in the morning, he stays there for about 10 minutes, feeling the space and moving furniture around. He will not let us help him. He moves it all around and stages the scene. He acts it to himself, and he works in this really organic, beautiful way. And then he'll ask questions like, could I do this? Could I do that? We'll go through it. Martin is observing all of that. Then they'll do a little shot list. But this is quite quick. It takes them about 20 minutes. Then they figure out the entire shooting, everything. And I was so impressed with him of how, when you see the movie, and I hope you go see the movie, you will see how he used each room. He took full advantage of the design and of the flow and of each room. And each scene was staged in a completely different way. And that's just wonderful. So this is the wallpaper. These are the textures. These are a lot of conversations between Martin and I. And then when he came, I started in November. He came in January. I was able to show him the practical samples. So there's the wallpaper that we created, some of the process that we do from inspiration to stuff. But the idea behind the wallpaper was, this was a happy house at one point, and this family wanted to travel. And it's their dreams of traveling and of this kind of world that they thought they were going to do, and then they never traveled. So the car outside, the original car Grandpa had was a 1954 Chevy. is on cinder blocks because it just broke down, and then he now has some really clunker from the late 60s, and that was the story we were trying to tell. So the first floor was on one stage, and next to it was the second floor. Very often, only on one project, Grey Gardens, I had to do the upper floor above the first floor. You split them very often because you don't want to go up and down all the time. It gets very high, right? So but when you do a second floor, you always put it on a platform so you can get that natural sense of height. This was, I think, about 6 feet platform. And again, a really interesting claustrophobic house. You want to tell that story. 12 people together, claustrophobic, one bathroom, always broken. Comedy, you know, and drama at the same time. And the uncle's room, this is Ben Affleck's room, Uncle Charlie, is the ultimate bachelor room. Even though he has girlfriends, he doesn't seem to hold on to them very much. He is an avid reader, so the surprise is when he opens up his closet and it's full with books. But he's also a gambler. So that's why he lives still at home. And what's interesting about the story is that all the kids, even though they're grown-ups, end up going back and living at home, which is really unusual for Americans. And this was the mother's room. This is where she comes back. That's the point of the story. That's young JR, and that's the mom. And they come back. And what I pitched the idea to George that she comes back to her own childhood bedroom, which brings a kind of sense of sadness to it, because it really is, she's in her 30s, it's really past time to be in children's bedrooms. And that was kind of sort of the tragic undertone to her journey, because her husband wouldn't pay the child support, so she has no money, so she's forced to come back to the house. And again, that wallpaper we designed specifically for the movie, and it was supposed to be like this just wonderful childhood bedroom that now has a sad little overtone over it. And then we worked, the aunt's room has a lot, each room got its own history, and they're tiny rooms. That's why you have to build them as sets. Another thing we do is we build, when the film calls for small rooms, you end up building them as sets, because then you can break walls and you can get more interesting shots. So this is the second floor, that's the set. So you can see the flow. We always connect, the staircase is the connecting tissue. And there's our wallpapers. And you can see the tones we were going through, and then a lot of aging, a lot of testing, we do camera tests too. I bring all these textures to the camera test to make sure that they're actually registering in the way that we're going to light them. Now the Dickens bar is, as I said, is the mothership. It's like literally the center of the neighborhood. Again, this is one of my sketches. So we found this beautiful location, and completely transformed it into 1970s. We completely recreated the awning and the windows. True, we changed all the windows. We put on the side, we put a wall to cover a lot of them because we didn't need that many windows on stage. So there's a wall there, and then you bring the picture cars, and then phone booths. I miss those. That's like really a beautiful thing. Now, the story about this awning is that originally, Martin and I had talked about a slightly different version of the awning, that it was going to be the original, that was going to be a little bit more moms and pops kind of awning with just a couple of lights. And then one day he came and said, you know, I've been thinking about having like neon strips under the awning. Do you think you have space to put them in? And I just said, Martin, that's a beautiful idea. But why don't we do the whole awning like that and then break some of the neon, black it out and break it? So it became the original 1930s awning, and it played so beautifully in the film, and we both ended up really loving it. But it's funny how these just moments of conversation and ideas spark and change the design in a completely different direction. So that again is one of our concept sketches for the bar. George was actually very involved in the bar because he apparently had an uncle who lived by the bar and spent a lot of years as a child in it. So it was really interesting. And it was the idea of making the ceiling roll came from George. He said, and so this is to accommodate the lights. So our ceiling opens up and rolls. It was on wheels, so you can close it and open it, and made it very easy to light from above. And all these practicals where everything we tested with Martin and collaborated on. And again, when you tell a story like that, that it's so realistic and grounded in reality, you're building the story of the bar, you're telling the story of the bar. So if a light broke, because the original lights from the 30s, they're not going to have it anymore on the market. So now you get a 1930s light next to a 1950s light, and then you get 1960s light, etc. So it tells that eclectic thing. My decorator really talked me into the yellow chairs. It was a big battle for her because I was very resistant to a bright color, but we aged the heck out of them and mixed them with wood chairs. And then the thing that Ben did is he wanted to have, it was a great actor choice, he wanted to have a beard for the 80s and be clean shaven for the 70s. It makes him look much younger when he's clean shaven, but it meant we had to shoot everything backwards. In other words, we had to do the 80s before the 70s. So we had to really agree on what the elements of the 80s were going to be and what the elements of the 70s going to be, so that we don't have continuity issues and tell the story the wrong way. And here's the set. We had, oh my God, I can go on forever about the table, the shuffleboard table, because it was originally a different thing, and it didn't work. And then this one didn't work either. And so, anyway, long story. We made it work. We made it work 2 hours before we started shooting, put it that way. It's part of our lives. And so here's the ground plan, and this is the little flat pieces. They're not flat, they were really three-dimensional, but this is what I'm talking about, where I use, and we make three-dimensional replicas of what's around the set. And it's something I just really love and fight for, and pretty fierce about it, actually. And this is it. That's the tender bar.
Great. Nelson, would you want to join us next? Okay, great. Let me just pull up the presentation.
So one of the things I love about production design is it's possibility thinking. Things that you may never have seen before or juxtaposed. Any way you can tell the story, you have that flexibility in production design. And if you're really working well with your team and on the same page, you really see it in the final product. There's nothing better than to see a movie where all the pieces are working together well. It tells the story at a whole different level than when you're just seeing something to begin with. So if you'll pop back to the previous one. When we first scouted, this was we're not seeing the full image for some reason. It's low on the screen. I don't know why that is. Yeah, I mean, all of them are low, and I don't know. They're cut up at the bottom, so. So basically, when we were doing our original scout.
1 second, Nelson. Can we just change the screen and we'll try to fix it? Thank you. 1 second.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things we talked about for In the Heights, the whole team, it is described as the hottest day of summer. The movie takes place over about 4 days, and there's a blackout in New York. Ironically, while we were prepping the movie, there was the first blackout in 40 years in New York City. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to create a sense of that heat, a sense of the sun bleach in the color palette, as well as the lighting, as well as the sweat, so that you would really feel that heat when you watch the movie. And that's hard to convey and convey well, because it can look fake. And I think we did it fairly well. So every movie I start with a huge mood board or design wall, put elements representing each of the sets, and the walls get filled up like crazy. And you can see in the next shot too, how dense they get. But those for New York and for Washington Heights, one of the things I wanted to do was find elements from the past. A movie that's contemporary has elements from previous generations, especially a neighborhood that's Puerto Rican, Dominican, and Cuban. And those cultures need to be presented in a way that they're discreet, but also in a way that they overlap, because when you're in the same neighborhood, you start borrowing food and flavors and elements from each other. So we worked very hard at doing a deep dive into the history of that neighborhood. New York has a huge main public library, and room 100 at the public library is a tear sheet room. It's huge, and it has files that you can look through, cataloged by neighborhoods or by eras, by subject matter. And so I did 2 days of just researching that, as well as walking all the streets of Washington Heights. And so all of those things get up in place, and then when we first scouted, this was our corner bodega location that we liked, and it's at 175th and Audubon. It was interesting that unlike any other neighborhood in Washington Heights, they had done a traffic calming corner to each of the sidewalks, which looked kind of weird at first, but ultimately it gave us the opportunity to have more dancing opportunities outside the spaces. So here's the before, and this is the after. So this is totally added on to the front of our bodega. The bodega actually goes through several iterations during the story. It's this as we first meet it, and then he closes the bodega, it gets stripped of it, of everything, and then at the end, he's renamed it El Sueñito, which means little dream, and we have that at the end. So you can see the looks of this, which looked like a very typical bodega back in, from the 70s on forward in the Washington Heights area. The mural on the side, this was how we found the side of the bodega. And I wanted to have very unique pieces of art throughout the neighborhood. So you'll see on the side a mural I created that has a guy in a boat with his head down and the Dominican Republic flag that's pointing to the island. He's dreaming of going back. You try to tell the story even in subtle ways in the backgrounds of your pieces, so you can see how that looked before. You'll pop to the next, and you can see then that mural, how it plays in the movie. This is a quick little concept. In the opening of the movie, there's a character named Graffiti Pete that is doing his own style of graffiti throughout the whole neighborhood. So I jokingly tell everybody I'm Graffiti Pete. I was doing all of these artwork pieces, and where we couldn't actually paint them, we were printing them on a material called Phototech that is really thin, has like little suction cups, and so even on brick, we could pre-do the murals. Everyone knew exactly what they were looking like. Then we could push them into the space. You could see the texture of the brick beyond, and then we would add flourishes of paint on top of that so that it would have a lot of life, and yet it was consistent. And if something happened, because we're filming in a real world location that is crowded, we didn't want to have the murals get tagged and have someone else put their graffiti on top of them and not be able to have the continuity. So by having them printed, we were assured of being able to have that. Then, of course, we, in order to have interiors that worked, we built the bodega on stage. You'll see a little bit of what we could see from the outside. And you'll see another picture in a second that has the salon in relationship to this. So we did ins and outs on stage. This is the interior of the bodega. The cardboard on the floor is very typical to soak up the rain. That is something that you see. The pressed tile ceilings. The map was an idea that John, the director, had. He said, I want to have some sort of map because geographically challenged people from the States don't quite know where the Dominican Republic is. And so I wanted to tell that tale in a very unique way. And so in order to do this, during the opening number, I wanted to have the Dominican Republic be right over the shoulder of our lead actor, Anthony Ramos, and said, well, how about we do something that feels classical in its base, but is made with products that he sells in the bodega. So every bit of it, the surround frame is all made from can tops from products he sells. There are there are candies, little galettes, there are ocean glass. There's a product in the States called Pepperidge Farm, little fish. So those are on this. There are keys for the Florida Keys. I knew everyone in America would know, here's the tip of Florida and there's Cuba. And the challenge being Dominican Republic is only part of an island. It shares the island with Haiti. So in order to help everyone know, here's where it is, the shape isn't recognizable, but by using old tile, subway tile, made the Dominican Republic flag on the portion of the island that's the Dominican, and the keys that surround it, creating the bit of starburst. And then one of my crew members just happened to get married while we were in prep, and they had gone to the Dominican Republic. So this even has sand from the Dominican Republic in the map. So it's really beautiful in creating, there's subway tickets, there are lottery tickets in this, there's sweet and low packets, because he's always talking about his cafe con leche that he sells there. It's all the story in a map. Then later, he's telling the story out on the beach in the Dominican Republic, and by the end of the movie, not to spoil the end of the movie, but you realize that he's really telling the story in the bodega, in the renovated bodega. And so I had to design the hut that's out on the beach, the little bar on the beach, in order to fit into the bodega set. So this is its last iteration with a graffiti Pete mural of where you've been seeing them tell the story out on the beach in the Dominican. So that's, each thing went through lots of layers. So this is the final version of the interior of the bodega. Every wall moved, everything could get out of the way. You want to make sure that every shot is available to a DP and a director as they come up with things. There's a nightclub in the show, and we were looking at, I couldn't afford, this is not a big budget movie, even though it looks big when you see it. There's a nightclub that we wanted to feel very Havana-like, and we needed to use an existing space. And we found a space in Lower Manhattan that was a two-story black box nightclub. And I knew because of the salsa dancing we were doing that I needed to really bring some color and vibrancy because we were going to see the floor a lot. So that becomes a conversation with a choreographer because you need to make sure that the dancers can actually move and not be too slow of a floor where their shoes are going to catch or too fast where they're going to slip. So we tested materials, and I found some tile from Cuba that I loved and blew up the pattern from the tile, made it look like it had been painted onto wood, and printed it on the underneath side of the clear material so that no matter how much we were spinning in one area, they would never get rid of the finish. So this is the look, and then that's how you see it in the movie, and we're seeing the floor a lot. So it creates a heat, and it's like the sun, and it just creates this sultry Cuban feel. There's a big sequence I mentioned a little earlier that involves visual effects, where we had a moment in the movie that John described as when you fall in love, there is no gravity. Life may be going on down below, but you're floating. And so he has one of our couples in the movie actually dance up the side of a building. In order to accomplish this, we had to figure out what I could afford and how we would actually rig this. So in the same stage that we had all of our streets and exterior, I built the side of a building that was reminiscent of some of the architecture in Washington Heights, but actually switched and changed to allow for the dance moments. The edges of the windows, the surrounds, the air conditioners, all of that. And then working with a choreographer, we printed full-size elements of those windows and things so that you could actually go through and see what we would build. So we worked with, this is a little computer model of what we were building. The main building is on its side. The scene starts actually vertically, and to make it work great for the choreographer and for John, I said, I really want this wall to be able to go from vertical to flat in 5 seconds, because no matter where, as we're doing and developing the dance, we actually had, as much as you would think, you know, okay, we can figure this out, until you actually have the mechanics, you don't know exactly where the camera can go and where the dancers can go. So we first modeled it to even see if this would even be remotely an idea that worked for the number. We took the building and taped it out on a dance floor, put connectors onto all of our actors, and we did a kind of a pre-visualization of the dance so that with our visual effects team, we were in real time tracking their body movements, and they were going around on a just taped floor to see if it was going to work with the camera moves and the lighting. And once we saw that, we knew, oh, this is going to be a really exciting concept, and let's go forward. So then we built the model, and you can go to the next slide. You can see, you know, how we were presenting this to everyone, what the hydraulics would do. And then it lays right into the building, and then the camera would, based on this, we figured how we could be moving around this, how we could see them even with the street below, and the camera and the sun, which was our lighting. Alice designed that in such a way that it would be moving. So the sun is always in the correct place. You're seeing the Washington Heights Bridge off in the distance, and you're able to go all around this set. And then by the end of the movie, or the end of this song, sorry, they're back onto the piece that would move up, which we could stop at any position, and then they were able to slide down. So here you see that environment as we're filming that with the beginning of the number, and we're up close. We wanted them on the baskets. Every element of this had to be worked out with the size of our actors. How big are those fire escape baskets they're standing in? When you slide down brick, which they do at one point, obviously you can't slide down without your costume collecting into the brick. So when we would put a slide board in those areas, which then was optically taken out, so it looks like brick. You have people dancing over the windows, and we needed to make sure that we, as an audience, know that gravity didn't change for everyone else. So we built a section of windows up on a platform. We had the actors dance across that window, and then we built a dining room and a bedroom and some other interiors so we could see and cut to the inside of rooms and see them dance across the windows from the inside out, which immediately makes you think that, you know, only these two lovers are without gravity. So you can see the image that we're getting right here in the early part of the scene. The challenging thing for the dancers, actors, was to learn how to shift their body weight so that as the set piece was moving, they also would look like they are without gravity. And that's how it appears in the movie, with the sun bleaching and flaring. Alice and John and I talked a lot about how when you have lens flares, it helps that heat. And we really wanted this scene to take place in view of the sunset at the Washington Heights Bridge. And I gave every element then of the rest of our neighborhood to our visual effects supervisor and what the rest of the building looked like beyond what we built on stage, and we were able to continue that. This is that element that you saw in the bodega when it's out on the beach, which is really in Long Island, not the Dominican Republic. And this is the same sort of thing you saw in Kalina's presentation, that for every environment, I'll come in and do the colors, the textures, all the elements that are a part of that, so there's nothing left to chance. You don't want any surprises in filmmaking. You want to have it all planned so that you're open to the improv of the moment with the actors, but not in the sets. And that's the abuela's apartment, which was actually a super modern apartment that we gutted and redid. And the owners were quite surprised with what it looked like, but they loved the musical, so they were very excited to be involved. This is the little pharmacy, which is another corner of the street. This is one of those murals that actually has a little bit of the elements of the story worked into it as well. You'll see the hands of the two different couples and the little girl they're telling the story to. That's what we started with. And if you pop back to that other slide, you see, yeah, there you go. You see that mural that then is actually layered with elements. A lot of the murals in New York right now have paper pieces put onto other painted pieces. So we were trying to do this. There's oodles of Easter eggs in this. This was if you'll go back a couple, that's an empty store that then the previous slide is Manuel's boutique. That's for Lin-Manuel Miranda, the writer. And there's a book now out on Random House that has a whole section on all the Easter eggs that are in this movie. This is part of that tunnel sequence that I was mentioning in the earlier Pacencie phase sequence. And I'm not sure if there's any more. Oh, yes. So there's a big Busby Berkeley number that's in a swimming pool that is the largest pool in all of New York. They've never allowed filming in it. And we had to work carefully with the city because they were going to open on their opening day no matter what. The pool needed a lot of rehabilitation, and they have to fill it and allow it to sit for 2 weeks to be warm enough for someone to be in it from the spring water. So we got the city to let us paint it the exact color we wanted and do all the rehab that we wanted and remove a lot of the fences and things. That's what the pool looked like prior. And then this is one of the shots that are in the movie that are really pretty crazy and fun. Is that the last of it? Thanks. So that's a little bit of In the Heights.
I think we're good, yeah.
You good?
Yeah.
Yep. I don't have nearly as impressive library. I unfortunately didn't have access to all of Grant's beautiful work, but we'll have a bit of a taste. This is one of our first scouts there, Grant, on the property that we ended up choosing. We were looking for this very silvery, pastel-y, fluffy grass, and we found it. This is actually one of the mountain ranges that we were considering and ultimately ended up, between Grant and Jane, deciding was too epic and too far away, that if we went closer it wasn't kind of lost something, and this far away felt, I don't know, we just didn't believe it. You go to the next one. That's that same mountain range. It's so tempting, but it wasn't. Yeah, we were deciding between the two, me and Grant and Jane, and this one unfortunately didn't make the cut. Anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to see the difference of these two, a big choice we had to make, and this is where we ended up ultimately. Just the scale of it, because it's smaller, you could be closer and still see all of it. It felt more humble, like something that you could believe a family could possibly own. Yeah, there's Jane there. We're looking, there's a particular element of the script that requires these hills to be kind of lit in a certain way. I won't do any spoilers, but it was really important that we had a mountain that had these kind of folds in it, I guess. There's Grant again. Yeah, as we got closer to the shoot, you can see that really bright green grass there, which we ended up, we were hoping it would, the year we ended up shooting was actually wetter than any other year, as it always is. So we had to kill the grass with this kind of coconut oil stuff. Have you guys done that before? Okay. It smells like a hippie house. It smells like, yeah, a student house. Weird kind of smell, but really effective. Yeah, so as we got closer to the shoot, Jane and I went down and did like a month of storyboarding not far from the location. So we would, in the morning, do boards and draw and stuff, and then in the afternoon, once the builders were gone, we would go down to the building site, and as it was taking shape, and kind of see if our ideas worked and find new angles, and kind of plan, yeah, we didn't make many tweaks once we got going, but we did make some. That was some of the original buildings that were on the property. Some of them we avoided seeing, some got painted out. Is Jane and Grant. Jane's very kind of responsive, so she really just needs to be in a place to feel it rather than, I learned a lot from her in that sense. I was a bit more maybe industrious, like take thousands of photos and then go back and compare them and crop them and grade them and be all analytical, and she was a bit more like, let's just stand here and feel it. And yeah, this, then once we chose the property, we got into looking at the interior. This is one of Grant's early design concepts. We had a few shots in mind. There's a scene where Rose is playing the piano and Phil is looking down from the up the top there, kind of mocking her from his bedroom. So we needed a particular layout to make sure that he could always kind of look down on her. There's a couple of other scenes where he looks down on her. And these, throughout the script, there's a really complex series of eye lines that were necessary to see the chorale from the kitchen, to see the piano from the balustrade, to see the house from the barn, and the mountains from everywhere. Anyway, so that was part of my job. I did I'll show you later, an analysis of the script at all the eye lines to make sure that Grant kind of had that as a list of things to take into account when they're building this jigsaw. Yeah, that is pretty, we didn't end up doing that exact frame, you'll see later, but another lovely frame. Kitchen was something we wanted, Jane had the idea to build both interior and that was the only room that existed down on location, so we did have some inside-outside stuff. That was our workaround to make it feel true. We knew if we could at least see out, or have someone go out from the inside once or twice, then we'd believe it a bit better. There's the house being constructed. It was such an epic effort, even just to find somewhere for all the builders to live. It was like... here's some shots from the trailer. So there's one that the backdrops were then painted on, top of digitally to sell winter. And that's a nice dark one that's inside the barn. Yeah, here's a cool one. So that whole background is all visual effects. Yeah, we built only one building of this town, but we also kind of changed the horizon line. We actually built the one building really close to where we built the ranch, because we knew we were going to change the whole environment, so we did scout early on a more environment like this, but it actually didn't make sense to go all the way there to then knowing we'd have to add visual effects anyway, so some beautiful work by Jay there. Yeah, there's that angle looking down on Rose, the piano. That whole house almost was designed around pretty much this angle and the reverse angle. And then, yeah, that you can see the backdrops out the left there, and just the sheen on the piano that's all kind of accurate because it's coming off the backdrops, which would have been a bit of a saga if it was blue or green screen. Just, it's fixable, it's just a lot more work, and then you always start questioning it. Never looks real even if it's accurate. Here's another set, which is upstairs, and same backdrops that we used and repurposed. That little rainbow was actually a real accident, which we kept. Yeah, not going to take credit for that one. Here's the house again. Actually, one of the big conversations was always budget. And the roof, the very top, I guess the top third and the chimneys was determined would be better to do as visual effects. So the bottom of the house existed in real life, and then the very top was a digital extension. And we also realized that this valley is like one of the windiest places in New Zealand. So to build the roof was also like a whole other safety reinforcement saga that I won't bore you with. Cool, is that it?
Yeah, I
Great.
think that's our last slide.
Great.
Thank you. So I think we have a little bit of time to open it up to questions from the audience, and I have a mic here for anyone who wants to ask.
Thank you for that. I got really excited. I want to watch the two films. I've seen In the Heights. I got really excited from the first beat to when the film opens. I'm a dancer, so I just, yeah. Anyway, I have a question for Kalina. You said something was wrong with the table, and then you made it work in the 2 hours. But I have a question because I am a little bit obsessed with how the bars are lit in general. Like, I just go to a bar just to feel the light and sit there and just soak it up a little bit. Did you have a conversation with the DP about the countertop of the bar?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Oh, yes. Is this on? Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And not only did we worked so hard to make it very real. One of the things that a designer relies on is the scenic artists, the painters who paint everything. So one of the things that I love doing when I do a realistic movie is going really through the history of that counter. So we put a lot of those rings, water rings. We made a lot of these, you know how like you put a wet glass and it just leaves a water ring and then your mother yells at you, did you ruin the furniture?
Yeah.
Well, you know, no one's yelling in a bar, so everybody's ruining the furniture. You know, so the countertops, we talked a lot about the actual sheen, the gloss. And we have, again, this is another part of a very important conversation with a cinematographer is about glossiness. And I really like to put a lot, I push the gloss about as far as I possibly could, you know. And so it depends on the DP, but Martin's really into it also. So we were pushing that and you can see, you can feel it. And then really the colors become so much richer and deeper. One of the reasons you do it is because it gives this depth to the color, the more sheen you have. High gloss can start getting reflective, but you want to just like really get right there into it. And so every element of the set was so aged. I work with the scenics. The ceiling, because it's tin, you know, ceilings, very typical for New York. We aged them probably twice, you know, because I just kept going, it's not grimy enough. This is New York, people, or Long Island. It's like, you know, let's go more. And the beauty of it, and also you have to remember that the camera makes everything prettier anyway. So in a way to get it actually more aged, you have to go deeper into it, but you have to be very careful you don't start looking theatrical. So it doesn't start looking like Charles Dickens suddenly, you know, that we're doing that. So it's a really fine line, but I find it like, I find the whole process, I'm very involved in it. I find, did I answer your question, by the way?
Yes, totally.
Okay.
Totally. Thank you.
As we're waiting for other people to ask questions from the audience, I'm just intrigued by, in terms of visual tools that you feel like could help when you're interacting with other departments, not just the cinematographer, because sometimes the cinematographer obviously is very visual, but even just sometimes we work with non-visual directors or other. What do you find is very helpful to communicate visual ideas? Obviously, first with the DP, but then everybody else.
By doing a big wall of the whole movie, everything is constantly accessible to everyone, and as digital as everything is, the more items you want to show on a computer screen, the smaller those items get to compare and contrast. So, and it's also difficult to feel fabric or to see the sheen of that in the furniture. So when I do these walls, they literally, the director can walk an actor through and give them a full sense without having to jump onto a computer monitor and having to do all that sort of thing. I will photograph those and send them if people want to have those, and then of course other visual tools that you send. But having a big wall that then transitions throughout. As drawings come about, they go onto the wall. As fabric gets chosen, flowers, the furniture, food, everything, there's pictures of it all there. And then there's nothing there's nothing left to chance. Everyone can see it whenever they want. You're not holding it off to the side. They don't have to hunt through their computer or emails to find it. They can take anyone at any time. And then the costume designer will come in and go, oh, I wanted to look at this with that. And that's challenging to do any other way. And yet, doing computer comps like you have seen today are very helpful to look at relationship and lighting opportunities and things. So I start at least with the physical and the tangible before going other ways.
Yeah, very, very similar, I guess. I mean, what's a bit funny maybe when I start a film, my team don't start till so late, so I wish I had the the time and the resources to kind of make more presentations and that kind of stuff, but to be honest, I do struggle a bit because I've got no buddies to help me. Just me in my little room. But sometimes I kind of, depending on the director, I don't like being in an office by myself, and I don't like being at the office at all, truth be told. I try and avoid it. But if I have to be there, I would either camp in the art department room or in a room with the director to kind of, I don't know, be part of that. But I was going to have an interesting thought I just had about, we're talking about light and reference about how much can get lost in miscommunication, even when you take a photo of something and maybe you take it on your phone under a certain kind of light and then someone else prints it out or opens up on their laptop and I don't know, we're talking about such tiny little nuances, and then it can be a bit brutal, the subtleties of, that kind of stuff. And I wish there was a more unified way to do that, or even, I don't know, I think about some directors are sensitive to, some directors are more or less sensitive to the photo itself of something, like a nice photo of something versus a very practical photo of something might be more or less receptive to, or some directors don't care at all, or even notice they can imagine it in their world without having to help them out with that. So I think that's an important thing for me to know get to know someone and know to what extent they're influenced by they can tune out the other elements of the photo. So I always try and adapt to that as best I can. And then I thought this is a super practical thing, but I think there's something to be said for labeling things. I can't tell you especially for a director or DP, and you're in the thick of it, and then an email comes through from someone, they're like, hey, what do you think of all these cars or whatever? And you're like, oh, the blue one. And you're trying to write back, and it's the blue one with the guy next to it on the left. Oh no, the big one. And I love when there's numbers or labels under them, and then we can all be talking about the same thing. Otherwise, or just that makes me really happy.
I'm laughing about this because I make people constantly, if a set decorator sends me a bunch of furniture, I go now can you please number it?
Yeah.
And they really just go I don't know how am I going to answer this? The chair that's to the left, to the above, to the one to the right?
The brown chair with the full legs. Yeah, just I guess about communication in general. There's visual communication, and then there's kind of other layers to that. And even I think we were talking earlier about what platforms we kind of use to share images. And I don't know if there's a perfect one. I think they all have their pros and cons, and the
complexity depending on the volume. Sometimes you do a movie in one environment, but if you're doing a movie that has 80, 120 environments, which often I have done in multiple cities, multiple countries, you have to be able to clarify what you're talking about and be organized. So there's one part of you that's project manager, and the other part of you and team builder and cheerleader to get people in their exhausted state to still come to your level of completion. This is what finished work looks like for this. And then there's another part of you that's still trying to maintain the nuances of narrative design.
Yeah. I think another thing about communication is I guess we're always up against it for time. And what's super helpful for me was when I when someone asks me a question and then they can also tell me like when they need to know by, or when they need to know by ideally, or like worst case scenario, because I don't know, again, different people, some people can be really spontaneous and decide straight away, other people want to sleep on it or have the chance to change their mind. And that's really important to know, to kind of get to know someone if that's how they work. I love everyone looking together at hard copies of printed out things, even if it's not perfect. Yeah, and then I think it's like something interesting as well, like the person I talk with most on set, apart from kind of the director and probably the grip and gaffer, is the standby props person. Like, that's such a huge, I don't know what there is more to say other than that it's like the face of the art department. It's like the art department, camera department, kind of. Yeah, they're like the, I don't know how you'd categorize them, but it's such an important role.
They're our eyes.
Yeah.
They're our eyes. Literally, that person is the eyes of the designer.
And they're working with very directly with the director and the actors and the DP and making those little, you go through big changes and then it could be in the last 20 seconds someone's like, get that thing out of here or throw that thing in there. But mainly just that there's someone I talk to constantly. I usually try and have them on radio and they hate it.
Yeah, in a way, they're often in the heat of the moment. Something will be moved or something will disappear, and it may be a story point for other scenes later. So it's very important to have all your team understand how all of those elements are, the significance. Can this go away, or does this have to remain? And an on-set dresser or on-set props person becomes our last line of defense to make sure that the drape all of a sudden in a scene isn't like flipped back and disappeared or something because someone moved a piece of equipment. It's hard to have that quality control as fast and as tired as you sometimes are.
Yeah, I think just the personality is like a huge thing. Even those little like bits like that tend to sort themselves out. Probably no one will roll. I wouldn't anyway if there's like a weird curtain, but the personality is like huge. I don't know. Yeah, not much more to say other than they're super important to me anyway.
There's one more thing that I do in terms of communicating. What I do is I do a very big wall with the timeline of the script. So how the scene starts, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3. I put a big tape line across half the wall. The bottom is the locations as we find them. So photos of the locations as they come. The top is all how we're transforming them. So all my concept sketches, all the other concept sketches of the other artists. Then you start building that above part with the set dressing as it comes in and stuff like that. And so I actually started doing this on Little Miss Sunshine. It was the first time I did it because it was a travel movie and we felt like we needed to understand the landscape when you travel to, because that's also a design. Even though it looks like landscape, it's still part of your job to determine that. And I have not stopped doing it. I just do it on every movie because then it becomes this really long wall that you can walk through and you can literally, and you yourself never forget how the sets interact with each other and where you're going color-wise, because we actually didn't have enough time to spend talking about colors.
Yeah,
color
or progression or something.
Yeah. There's a whole other seminar on that. But when you do that wall, you really, truly, you see your locations, you see the transformation, and you see your color palette developing. And, you know, I tend to be very conceptual about color palettes, so I really have a very strict feeling about what colors I'm going to use throughout the film and how they're going to react with each other and where the palette is. And it's really helpful to me, it's helpful to the DP, it's helpful to the director, and it's a great place to kind of chat and hang out and have coffee and talk. So this is something I do.
Basically, you're making a visual arc in the same way that there's a character arc from the beginning to the end of the movie. You want to be able to take people on a visual journey, and you have to track that, because if no one's tracking it, all of a sudden you may end up with something else at the end.
More questions from the
Hello. I would like to ask something about the collaboration between either if you're a production designer with a cinematographer and the director. Perhaps if you could answer me with some examples. When would you feel the need for the director to be included in a discussion with the other part, and perhaps when you would think that you could, it would be better for and more efficient to discuss directly with the other without the inclusion of the director.
It's interesting, having already had a relationship with Alice Brooks, working with her previously and then going into In the Heights, and we know John so well, there were often times that he was so pulled in recording sessions, because when you're doing a musical, every single number has to be pre-recorded, and so you're making sure that the performance in the pre-record matches what you want to have happen in the scene. So he's actually directing the musical recordings, and his time was pulled so much into choreographic rehearsals and recording sessions and all those things that not often could he do things with us physically. So Alice and I had a lot of moments where we were coming up with how to solve a particular story challenge, and then we would work through different permutations of that and then present him something so he didn't have to be involved in all of the process. And part of that is you just have to feel what works and what doesn't. You're kind of going, okay, we're stumbling a little bit here, so we need to bring him in because we need a little bit more clarity about what to do. But his outlines of each of the musical numbers at least was a great guide, so we were able to, jump through and say, okay, well, let's try this, and then bring him in.
Thank you.
I mean, the nature of our business is that the designer comes in very early into the process, and very often we don't even know who the DP is at the beginning. So the beginning of every project is mostly the designer and the director. I always encourage people to hire the DP as much as they can, and even if they're not available to come to us, to start a dialogue so that we can be really on the same page from the very beginning. But the initial conceptual discussions are really, truly between the designer and the director. Ideally, if you're in Australia with Jane Campion, you have a year of doing that. In America, everything's so expensive, everybody's so expensive, and everybody's so busy, we don't have that kind of time. So unless you have a relationship like you do, if you're new to the project and you're working with people, you really are working first with the director and then bringing in the other artists. And it's on you as a designer to make sure that the other artists are included. That's why I just believe in collaboration.
Yeah, I wish every project had a year. That was definitely a once-off. I have 6 weeks on the next one, so that's probably more reflective. I think what is interesting about the year thing is actually that maybe it's when you get to be have a certain level of you become a producer as a director to be able to say this is what I need in every aspect, or like this is what I need to do my work. But I think that can trickle down to any level for directors to say what it is they need, and for me anyway, I think of myself as quite an advocate for picking up on what they need and filtering that through. But yeah, in terms of the collaboration, exactly what you're saying, I would say working together to put forward a proposal to a director. I would personally never kind of make a decision that was just a private decision between myself and a designer and not involve the director. But yeah, like by the time I come on and by the time the director and production designer are in the room, the director's also got so much on. That's just how the timeline progresses. So their time is so valuable that the best way to kind of for them to think clearly is to make a really clear proposal rather than having them to go through all the clicking and uploading and choosing, and then you can have more time to actually talk about it rather than them having to witness the whole thing being made.
I think we have just time for conclusion. And so let me just ask you as a final question, what is your best advice for collaboration? And of course, it doesn't have to be just DPs or production designers, it could be directors or anyone on the set. What would be a piece of advice to anyone who's here in the audience starting out or for collaboration?
I think you have to have a great attitude and want to collaborate. Oftentimes you'll get on a project and people have turf wars, or they are pushing a particular agenda that may be at odds, or maybe it's the perfect thing, but because they're not open to this collaborative way of telling stories, you actually see it in the final product if people are fighting against each other. If all of a sudden here comes costumes that have no relationship to everything else, or if the paint is different than, with the sheens and the thing, whatever the decision is, you can tell when people have communicated. And so having an attitude of being open to communication and actually being fun to be around is really, really valuable. If people want to be around you, they're going to be in your office more, they're going to share more about a private conversation that may have happened just by chance as they were in the van looking at something, and the director may have said something and it didn't come in a memo to you. But if you want to be around each other and you create that environment, then you remember oh yes, we had that quick conversation. Here, let me tell you what this was. And it makes the whole journey much more fun if you actually take it upon yourself to make the journey fun.
Well, I'll piggyback on that, because I always call the art department the fun department, and everybody loves coming to the art department. I'm telling you, they love hanging out in the art department because of the textures are there, and it's just so tactile. And also, I always do wine and cheese on Friday at 5 p.m. So that's another way you can get people to come and visit and bond with you. So there's a lot of ways we can do, but I totally agree that you have to be open to collaboration. It has to be in your spirit, and it has to be that spirit of generosity. I think what we do as artists in film is extremely communal. It's not, I'm not a painter, I'm not in front of an easel all day by myself in a room. And so that spirit of generosity is what carries us through as artists and as filmmakers, and it's the most important thing that we carry through. And I also feel that no director will hire me unless they were into that, because I'm obviously so open and collaborative. If somebody doesn't like that person, they'll never hire me. Don't worry about it. I always end up being hired by the people who like that, So it's going to be a natural journey, and you'll end up exactly where you belong and with the people you belong.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Eating together is like probably the #1 thing to do if you want to go fast track to a good collaboration. Eating is like good foundation, but I actually, it's all communication and good listening, I guess, because sometimes some of those even ideas that come across too strongly, that you have the instinct to be defensive if someone's like going in too hard or sticking to their thing, to kind of get to the bottom of it, what the reason is behind it, to really listen or be curious about. Tell me more. Tell what, like in a way that doesn't make them feel questioned. It's tricky, but to kind of behind that, there's probably a reason or a fear or a budget constraint, something they're really scared of, probably. And then I had one more. Oh yeah, I actually find email like the worst. I hate it. And it's a big part of all of our lives. It's kind of undeniable, but I would keep email for when things need to be like 4 people CC'd. I mean, that's also hellish. Who wants to get us? Maybe I'm just like deep in email right now, but that's also its own kind of pain. But when there's a conversation that needs to happen between a few people, or everyone at the same time needs to be like, FYI, this thing, or something needs to be officially in writing, which is also kind of a thing that sometimes needs to happen. But otherwise, I think for a DP designer, one-on-one relationship, it's like you can call them. If you're not already in the same room or in the same vehicle, call them, even text, or some other way other than email. I don't know. I feel like there's a more, you can build a lot of familiarity by, I don't know, just speaking to them on the phone, or in a less kind of, I don't know, painful way.
Yeah, and on that note, actually, we're here and we're talking to
Yeah.
everyone. So this is, we're very, very grateful for the experience, for the opportunity to share and to be together, especially after this past year. So thank you so much for listening, for staying with us, and if you have any questions, we're here, we can hang out later. So thank you to everybody.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
organizing.
Kalina.
It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.